Hello, I'm Emma Desi, and welcome to another episode of Turning Readers into Writers. If you're brand new here, welcome, and here's what you need to know. This is a community that believes you are never too old to write your first novel. No matter what you've been up to until now, if you're ready to write your book, I'm ready to help you reach the end. I focus on helping you find the time and confidence to begin your writing journey, as well as the craft and skills you need to finish the book. Each week I interview debut authors, editors and industry experts to keep you motivated, inspired and educated on all things writing, editing and publishing. If you want to catch up, head on over to emmadesi.com where you'll find a wealth of information and tools to help you get started. Before we dive in, this week's episode is brought to you by my free cheat sheet, 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write. In this guide, I give you 30 ways that you can find time to write in the small gaps that appear between the various errands and tasks and responsibilities that you have in your day-to-day life. Now, you might be thinking that you don't have any time to spare, but I can guarantee these top tips will give you writing time you didn't think you had. If you thought writing always involved a pen and paper or a keyboard, think again. If you thought you needed at least an hour at a time to write your manuscript, I help you reframe that. You won't be disappointed. Get your free copy of 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write by going to emmadesi.com/30 Top Tips. Okay, let's dive in to today's episode. Born in Athens, Greece, Teri Brown now lives in North Carolina in the US. And the peaceful nature of the sea has been a great source of inspiration to her creativity. In 2017, after finally getting out of an emotionally abusive 14-year marriage, Teri began dabbling in fiction, a lifelong dream. Upon winning the first annual Anita Bloom Ornoff Award for Inspirational Short Story for a piece about her grandfather, she began writing in earnest. Teri's debut novel, Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, is a historical fiction set in the Ukraine and was published in December 2021. I had a great chat with Teri, particularly about the inspiration behind this novel and the research that she had to do. It's really, really interesting. And of course, very timely because the Ukraine is very much in our minds at the moment as the war continues there with Russia. But this is a great uplifting story from Teri about how she came to writing, how she has continued to research, work on her stories, and finally get the book published out last year. So delve in, listen to Teri, and take inspiration from her. She really is a whirlwind of energy. Teri, it is so lovely to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on the show.
Yay. Well, I love to always start off just asking my guests about their journey to writing and sort of where you are now with your writing.
All right. So it's really interesting. As a very small child, 6, 7, 8-year-old, I used to say that I wanted to be 3 things. I wanted to be a brain surgeon. I wanted to be an Olympic ice skater. And if you knew how klutzy I was as a little child, that's really funny. And I wanted to be an author. So I think it's really interesting. I did get 1 out of 3 correct. So that's pretty good. But I didn't really begin that author journey for years. In fact, in 2000 is when I started writing nonfiction, and I started writing it for small businesses, writing articles and stuff for their website content, those kinds of things. And I did not start actually writing fiction until about 2017. And so at that point, I was over 50, and it took me a long time, I think, to get from yes, I want to be an author at the age of 8 to I'm actually an author now at the age of 58. So for me, a big part of that journey, though, was getting the confidence to believe that I was capable of writing. Writing nonfiction was easy for me because you don't put your heart and soul into it. At least not business writing. I mean, if your client says, I need an article on real estate investments in New York City, well, then you do research and you write an article on investing in New York City. And there isn't any of you in that. Fiction writing, on the other hand, or even like memoir writing or other nonfiction, that comes from somewhere inside. And so to put it out into the world is a little bit scary, because what if someone doesn't like it? You know, then you have that if someone doesn't like what I wrote about New York City real estate investing, I just assume that they don't care about New York City investing, right? But if they don't like my book, then that's kind of like saying you don't like me. And that's a whole lot, I don't know, that's like a whole lot more, you know, close to your heart. And so I was just really afraid to put it out there. And then I had another little thing going on. I was married to an emotionally abusive man for 14 years during that period of time. And I left that relationship in 2017. So I also didn't have any confidence in myself anymore. And if you don't have confidence in yourself, and there's that fear of putting yourself out there, between the two, my fiction wasn't going to go anywhere. And then I got out of that relationship and almost immediately started writing. And I think that the characters that have been living in my head all these years said, okay, we've had enough. We've waited long enough. We are writing now. So you'd better get out. You'd better sit down, because here we go.
Well, that's wonderful. It's like a sort of chrysalis coming alive, unfolding. As soon as you had that space and that your head was able to kind of have a little bit of perhaps to clear a little bit and rediscover yourself and who you are.
Exactly. And it took some time. The first novel that I wrote is probably never going to see the light of day, because it's not that good, but it gave me the confidence to go ahead and keep writing, because I went to this writers in residence program. I had 1 week. And during this time, nobody bothered me. Okay. Now, I was still married to the emotionally abusive man. I left him 2 weeks after I came home from that retreat. So I think that kind of gave me and I sat down in 1 week and wrote 50,000 words. And I got that novel out of my head from start to finish. Now, like I said, it wasn't very good, but it had a beginning and a middle and an end. It had characters. They did things. And I realized that I had the ability in 1 week to write 50,000 words. And that if I could do that, that maybe there was something more, and maybe I really was more capable than I thought. And I came home from that retreat. He was very unhappy that I had been gone for a week. Things did not go well after that, and shortly thereafter I left. And I've pretty much been writing ever since. So yeah.
It's amazing. There's a lot of things I wanted to kind of go back to revisit what you've said. There's so much. I think too, if anyone has not been on a retreat, they may not be in the extreme position that you were at that time, but the power of being on a writing retreat is, I've experienced it too, and it's amazing being with others who are all about what you're about, and just having that space of time and a mind to focus on your thinking.
For me, the time and the space, I can write at home, but I never am as productive as I am if I'm somewhere else, where the dog doesn't need to go out and supper doesn't need to be cooked, and there's no laundry sitting in the basket calling my name. And when I'm gone, I let people know. So no one's calling me on the phone. No one is demanding. They're just not demanding anything of me. And I get to choose my schedule completely. When I'm tired, I go to bed. When I'm awake, I get up. If I'm awake at 3 a.m, I can write, and I don't worry that I'm going to bother anyone. If I write through dinner, I'm the only one that suffers. I mean, there's just something about being in that space. And then, like you said, surrounded by other people who are doing the very same thing. It's like you feed off of one another. And the retreat that I went to is held in an old house that was owned by an author, and he gave it to the city And then with the stipulation that the upstairs rooms had to be used for authors. And so they open it up during the day so that people can come in and view this beautiful old mansion on the lower floors. But on the upper floors, there are always writers writing. Oh. And when you walk in, it's like you can feel all of those words that have been written in that space, and they just kind of land on you, and it's, wow. Yeah, I mean, and I've been there several times now. I love that place. And as I drive up, you can just feel it. You're driving up and it's like, oh, I'm going to be able to write. I'm already ready to write. Like, you can hardly get your things out of the car fast enough.
So yes, as you can tell, retreats are definitely well worth doing if you can. Yeah. I also think it's really telling as well that you wrote those 50,000 words in 1 week. And I think that speaks to the power of writing, of being a writer, whether it's journaling, whether it's fiction, whether it's odds and sods, short stories, whatever takes your fancy. There's something about the creativity of that is so good for our mental health and can help us sort a myriad of problems and issues and confusing thoughts going on in our brains. We can sort them all out by writing about them in one way or another. And I certainly, my life changed when I wrote my first novel in ways I didn't think that it would, or I certainly didn't anticipate. And it's one of the reasons I do what I do, which is to help new writers get their first story written. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned there that you wrote your first story when you were 50. How did that feel? Because this is a question that does come up every now and again about, am I too old to write my book? And sometimes I get this from people in their 30s. And so how did it feel for you making that change? Did it feel like a big change? Did you go straight to sort of writing full time and this became your new career, or was it more of a transition than that? How did you feel kind of inside about making that decision to go back to your childhood dream and become a writer?
So when I turned 50, it was the hardest year of my life. And I know that sounds crazy, and I'm not a person to get stuck on an age. 30 didn't bother me, 40 didn't bother me. I don't think 60 is going to bother me, but something about 50, I just kept thinking, I'm half a century. I'm definitely at this point, the likelihood is I've lived more than half my life. And I looked around and, I have 4 children and I was a stay-at-home mom and I would do that again. But I felt like I didn't have a whole lot to show for my life. Like, I have my kids and they're doing well and I'm very proud of them, but you can't tote them around in your purse and pull it out and say, here's my resume. Here's the things that I've accomplished. I've accomplished these children. It just somehow doesn't work that way. And so I was really feeling, and then, like I said, I was in the middle of a really bad relationship too. And so I just felt so, I don't know, awful. So I started thinking about, well, what can I do to change that? And the first thing that I didn't start with writing. I actually started by taking piano lessons, because it's something I've wanted to do since I was a little girl, and we didn't have a piano when I was a little girl. And so I thought, well, I could do this. And so I started taking piano lessons, and I'm not that great at it, but I enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And it gave me kind of this creative outlet. And I thought, oh, well, if I can do that. So then I took some ballroom dancing lessons, and I learned to play bridge. And there were several things that was kind of like putting little feelers out to see if I was still the least bit capable of doing something new. So if I hear from someone who says, oh, I think I'm too old to write, my answer is, you're only too old to write if you believe you're too old to write. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It has everything to do with, what do you believe? And if you believe that there's a writer inside of you, then go write. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I don't think age has anything to do with it. I feel the same way about a 15-year-old. If they asked me, am I too young to write? No. If you feel like there's a writer inside of you, then the best thing that you can do is write. Start mm-hmm. writing. Mm-hmm. Don't try to take a course. Don't worry about getting a degree. Not that those things are wrong, but the only way to be a better writer is to write.
Mm-hmm. Yes, 100%. It's like an apprenticeship. You've got to start with your apprenticeship at some stage, which right. Make me think about, with your first novel, we're all the same, aren't we? We've all got those those drafts in a bin, so in a folder somewhere or in a file somewhere. And I also liked what you said, or I appreciated what you said about the feeling that if somebody doesn't like my book, then they don't like me. And I think that is something that a lot of us do worry about, particularly with our first novel, which tends to be the novel of our heart, something that we've been, we think of as our baby and we've been living with for many, many years. So I think that's a really, really natural response and feeling that a lot of people have. Have you had any sort of less than positive feedback, and how did you cope with that?
Okay, so with the first one, I gave it to, of course, my children, because your children are going to love what you do simply because they love you, right? But I was really parsimonious about who I was giving that one to, because this was, like you said, this was my baby. This was this piece that proved to me that I was capable, right? And I didn't want anyone to badmouth it, because then they were going to tell me I wasn't capable, and I needed to be capable, right? I needed that. So really that one has really never been shown to anyone other than people that I knew would love me. And applaud my effort. I do have one of my daughters who is, I call her my critic, and I let her see it last after I had already gotten kudos from everyone. And she told me, and she's my critic, and she said it has some very good bones. So that meant it needed a lot of work, but she was very kind about it.
Very diplomatic.
Yes. So when I went back and I've looked at that sense, and it was like, so what is wrong with this book? She's right. It does have good bones. The storyline actually is very good. The characters are very flat. Right. My main character has no flaws. Okay. She is perfect. Okay. And she goes from one horrible thing to the next, like Superwoman.
Okay. And we don't want to read about that, do we?
Yeah, she never fails. She never stumbles. She comes out of everything looking, clean and shiny. And I think the reason that I wrote her that way, there's a lot of me in her, and at that point in my life, I needed me to be able to do everything that needed to be done perfectly and to get through it. And I couldn't let her fail, because then that would be me failing, and we couldn't have that, So I really think that she was just very two-dimensional, not very realistic, because I couldn't let her be. Now, if I were to go back and work on this book, that's a lot of what would have to happen, is we would have to see some reality. There's got to be some times where she comes up from something with smudges on her face instead of just, squeaky clean and shiny. And, I've learned that when writing characters, you have to give them a lot of depth, because the reason people love characters is because they can relate to them. And you can't relate to someone who's perfect. Exactly. Or the only way you might relate to them is by hating them. And, that's not really what you want. No. You need them to have real struggles, real feelings, real thoughts. We all have those ugly thoughts that go through our mind. And we want our characters to have that same kind of thing happening to them, because then you can relate to them. Then you start really pulling for them and really wanting them to succeed, because you see that they too had that horrible thought go through their mind when something happened, instead of, oh, there they are, Miss Perfect, always doing the right thing all the time. There are a few books that I've read who have a character like that in it on purpose. That's the character that you choose to really dislike. That's the one that kind of is the nemesis of your main character, who's always walking around as Miss Perfect. But then later in the book, you find out that there's something horrible going on in her life after all. But all of my characters in that first book were just perfect, except for the villain characters, and they were horrible. And they didn't have any redeeming characteristics at all, which also made them totally unrealistic. because most people, even the most horrible people, have something, a child that they love, or a cat they take care of, or something, you know.
Yeah, or a reason why they are that way. And so when we get
Exactly.
their backstory,
Or some horrible event that happened to them as a child that you know, shaped the rest of their lives. And so I think that, you know, that first book was proof that I could get the words down. And then I wrote another novel that will also not see the light of day, but the characters are a little better. The descriptions of what's going on around are a little better. I did a little more showing instead of telling. I started to understand that having dialogue was really a good thing, and that I'm good at it, and that I need to use that because that's something that I do better than some other things. I'm terrible at describing bedrooms or you know, what someone's wearing. It's kind of like, yeah, so it's red and it's got sleeves. I'm just not, that's not where my strength is. So you kind of play to your strengths and then work on those weaknesses.
I think it's a really important point you've made there, because when we're, particularly when we're starting out, but even I think if you're further along and you're writing your first draft, we have a tendency to default to thinking that we're dreadful at everything and this is all awful and no one would like to read it. But actually, you've made the good point there that we're all good at one or other aspect of writing a novel, and it's only through practice and a bit of longevity that we get to see, oh no, do you know what, I did this quite well. Or if you get reviews in and they like one aspect of your writing better than others, you begin to build a more realistic picture of your capabilities and skills as a writer. And so, as you say, you then get to play to the strengths and at the same time work on the weaknesses as well. So you begin to build a more level playing field for yourself. So
exactly. Really... So like when I go back and do my edits, a lot of my edits have to do with putting more information in about the surroundings or what my character looked like, or it very rarely do I have to add much about how they're feeling or what they're thinking, because that's what comes very naturally to me. But I think it's really interesting because it's kind of the way I am in life. I can meet someone and my mom can meet the same person, and afterwards she'll say, did you notice how crooked her teeth were? And I'll say, no, did she have teeth? I mean, it has to be really just like freakishly weird or so bizarre or absurd for me to really recognize anything more than that's a person and we're having a conversation. Because I'm focused more on their nodding while I talk and their eyes twinkled at the right time when I was saying, you know, the funny piece, and we had a good dialogue going and her body language showed that she was in tune. I don't notice her teeth. I don't notice what color her shirt is. I just don't. And so when I write, I tend to do the very same thing. And then I go back and think, you know what? Someone's going to want to know where these people are. I probably should put that in here.
Yes. I can relate to that 100%. So I'd love to move on to your latest book, your debut published novel, in fact, Sunflowers Beneath the Snow. Tell me a little bit about the inspiration behind this story, because it's rather tragically, it's very kind of timely at the moment because it's set in the Ukraine. So where did the inspiration for it come from?
So it's a really unusual story. Two of my daughters worked at a summer camp when they were teenagers, and in the camp would always have international students come as part of the camp process. And it was great for the kids who would go to camp there because they got to experience other cultures without ever, you know, leaving the state. And then these counselors, they got a lot out of it because they got a 3-month visa, but only worked for 2 months. So then they would get another month where they could travel around the United States. One of the girls was from Ukraine. She came in the summer of 2013, And then she was able to come back again in the summer of 2014. Then she went on her little roundabout trip around the United States and could not go home because Russia had invaded Ukraine directly in the town where her parents lived.
Wow.
And so my girls knew her. And so we kind of knew of her plight. She ended up being able to stay in the United States for another 3 months. They extended her visa because of the situation, and she was working with a lawyer. And the lawyer said, we're not going to be able to get you back home, and I can't get you a green card fast enough. We're going to have to take you to a refugee camp, probably in Poland. And she didn't want to do that because she said, I don't know anyone there. I don't speak Polish. I don't want to be, that's not what I want. And so she disappeared. And she ended up going to New York City and disappearing into the Brighton Beach area. She continued working with a lawyer. She still lives in the United States and now has a green card. And she is here legally, and she's never been able to go back home. And so she's never seen her parents again since 2014. In 2016, she came to visit my daughters, and she was standing in my office telling me this little tiny sliver of a story that happened to her when she was in New York City. And it seemed so preposterous that I thought, I must be misunderstanding. Like this is a communication issue. She has a very thick Ukrainian accent, and I must not be hearing correctly. So I repeated what I thought she said, and she was nodding in agreement the entire time. And I thought, this just can't be. So once again, I asked her a lot of questions. Yes, indeed, I had it right. That little tiny sliver of a story is the very, very end of the last chapter, not the epilogue, but the last chapter. And I wrote 80,000 words so that I could tell that little sliver of an ending.
Oh, that means we won't get to know the sliver of a story today.
You have to buy it. What a shame.
What an amazing story, though, about the girl in her, in the first place. Never mind the sliver of a story, but
right.
Wow, gosh, okay. And she's not been allowed to go back to Ukraine since.
So it's not that she's not been allowed to go to Ukraine. It's just that where her parents still are has been taken over by Russia. So she wouldn't really be going to Ukraine. She's been afraid that if she goes, she might not be able to get back.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
And so she talks to her parents. They do Zoom and Skype and other things. And when Russia invaded just recently, I definitely got in contact with her to ask how her parents are doing. They're currently okay. They don't have a lot of the things that they need. It's very scary. And she is devastated and brokenhearted. And it's amazing to me. I spent, a long time working on this book and getting to know Ukraine, the Ukrainian people. And when I woke up on the morning of the invasion, I was sick. I don't know anyone there. I know her, and through her, I know her family's there, but I've never been to Ukraine. I don't speak Ukrainian, and yet those are my people. And that's kind of what I'm hoping this book will do for people, is to give them kind of a compassion about Ukraine, the situation they're in, and give them someone that they know, quote unquote, know. I had someone today say to me, I loved the book. Thank you so much. What's going on in Ukraine matters more to me now because I have, and then in quotes, family there.
Oh, beautiful. So you really are changing,
and that's what I'm hoping. That's what I'm hoping, is because I think that when you have a connection to something, then you feel much stronger about your plight. We're sitting here in the United States, and in the United States, what's going on in Ukraine matters. I'm not saying that we're, heartless, but it doesn't matter very much. We have an ocean between us. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's changing our gas prices, but that's about the extent of my daily change. I still get up in the morning and eat my breakfast. The sun's still shining. We're still traveling about freely. Nothing has really changed in my life. So yes, we feel for the plight, but I think we feel more if we know someone there, or if we feel we know someone there. And that's what I'm hoping this book will do.
Again, the power of fiction. Fiction can create that connection. We think they're just stories, but actually it's how we empathize and learn about the world and what other people are going through. So that's a beautiful story about what the reader had said about now that they had family.
She wrote that to me this morning. That's the first thing I read when I woke up, and I started to cry.
Oh, I'm not surprised. Yeah. I'm not surprised. So Ukraine, as you say, for you, the people, has become kind of, you feel like you know them, that they're your people. And you did a lot of research. So could you tell us a little bit about the research that you did and how you got those details right for the book?
So the first thing I did was a very, what I call Wikipedia general kind of research, because I knew very little about Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that they were under Soviet control. I knew they were independent, and I knew that Russia had gone in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. I didn't even know why Russia had gone in 2014. I really knew very, very little. So I kind of did, the big, broad overview. What is Ukraine, and what is their relationship with Russia, and why? And so that's kind of where I started, and, got a pretty good feel for, why the tensions. For instance, Crimea, it's because they want that port. Without the port, the port is power. And so, that's why they want it. And so, you kind of start understanding. And then you realize that, during the Soviet conflict, that whole time with the Soviet Union, there were a lot of Russian people who migrated into Ukraine. And then when Ukraine became sovereign, those Russian people, they still feel Russian, and they're, so there's just a lot going on there. So I learned about all of that. Then when I started writing the story, I would realize, okay, so I started it in 1973, and that I did that because it was kind of a time when there was a little bit of rebellion going on, and I needed the rebellion for my story. So, that's where I started. And then as I progressed through the years, each time I would get to another point in time, I would just throw that year in, and Ukraine and Soviet Union, and see what information I got. I would find out things like, this particular winter was a horrible winter, very cold. People didn't have enough fuel. They didn't have enough food. Lots of people died. And so I made sure that in the novel, I had that happening in a way that my characters were experiencing some of this turmoil that was going on. And I put in historical fiction has the bones of whatever really was going on there. So I tried to remain as true as I could. So I would bring up actual political people that were in power or who were running for power. During the point where I have Ukraine becoming independent, I talk about some of the different people who were running for office, and I have my main characters kind of distraught over one and liking another. And that way I was able to say why, and do it in a way that was very organic feeling without it sounding like a history lesson. So that's another thing that I've been told, is a lot of people are like, wow, I really got a good basic understanding, which I think is really necessary, because you can't understand what's happening there now if you don't understand what happened in 1960 and what happened in 80 and what happened in 90, because all of that is kind of a conglomeration of what's happening today. Whenever you take current events out of context of history, you often miss what's actually going on here.
Yes, it needs a big picture. And so, given that it's historical, it does cover a wide period of time, and you had your research to do, how long did it take you from that sort of first initial idea through to getting ready to publish?
So I had the first idea in 2016 when she told me that story, and I did not start writing it down until 2018. I didn't even start writing it down. I didn't believe that I was the person or capable of getting that kind of story out, because I wanted it I wanted it to kind of somehow be true to her, even though it was a fiction. Does that make sense? Like I wanted her, if she read it, to feel like, no, this is not my story, but it could be. And so I was a little worried about that, because that's kind of it's a big task. So in 2018, I finally felt like, well, I can write this down. And I once again wrote a bulk of the book in about 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
But I didn't. The bulk of the book was the basic storyline. It was getting it out. So it was more of a really glorified outline. Okay. So I got it all out. And then I started going back and really working on my characters and working on the historical fiction aspects. Like, okay, so I've got them doing this at this time, and I've got to bring in all of this stuff. And so how long did it take me? Well, I started writing it in 2018, and the publisher accepted it in the spring of 2020. Okay, and so then after and then after I got it accepted, I still had a lot of editing to do. So I mean, it's not like you get it accepted and then you go on your merry way. You then have editing, which is not, by the way, my favorite thing in the world. And I kind of like the initial, what I call word vomit, where you just kind of let it all out. And then that editing portion, it's like, oh, it's so tedious.
I know. So I'd love to ask you about your your route to publication. So did you have a publisher in mind? Did you do what most of us do, which is go for a blanket query?
So I went for a blanket query, and quite frankly got almost no one paying any attention to it, and it's so disappointing. It's just, the first few rejections actually don't feel too bad, because you feel like, oh, good, I'm out there and I'm doing it. And, by 27 and 30, you're starting to think, and then you start reading the statistics about how how many people are query every day and how many letters they get and how you have to be in the right place at the right time. Blah, 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 and you think to yourself, this is never, ever going to happen. So then I really looked into self-publishing. And I think it's a very good option for a lot of people. And I really considered it. And then I came upon someone, they call themselves a hybrid publisher. And it's not a vanity publisher. They do not publish everyone. It's not that, but it's a hybrid publisher where they help you with the editing. They help you with your cover. They help you get it out to Amazon. They're in charge of some of those tedious things in the background. But I got to keep all my rights to this book. So everything that happens to this book is under my control. And I really like that aspect of the self-publishing. So I feel like I got the best of both worlds in this, in that I have a publisher behind me, someone that gives my book a little more credence, but I still have complete control. Yeah. And I had an editor, but the editor could only make suggestions. They could not force me to do anything. Okay. And I liked that as well. But here's what I would caution someone in terms of that kind of situation. The editor knows what they're doing. So unless you have a really strong reason for not wanting to do what the editor suggests, I recommend listening to at least 80% of what they have to say. They're not just recommending things because that's what they like to do with their day. They're recommending it because they know they're in the business. They know what sells. Yeah. On the other hand, I know my book. I know my characters. I know what I was trying to do, and they don't. And so I like having that ability to really listen to what they have to say, but be able to say to them, in this particular case, I think that I'm going to do this anyway.
Yeah. And it's nice having that creative freedom with the hybrid that you wouldn't get with one of the big publishers in the traditional.
Exactly. I was actually talking to a friend yesterday, and I was so shocked. There's an event in my area, and she lives within the same, area. And I said, hey, would you like to be part of this event? And she said, oh, that sounds like fun, but I'm not allowed to sell my books on my own.
It's crazy, isn't it?
And I thought, so is it your book or is it not your book? And the answer is it's no longer her book. Mm-hmm. It's her publisher's book. Yeah. And she happens to have her name on it. And for her, it's working well. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that per se. It doesn't really fit my personality very well. Yeah. I spent too many years under the thumb of someone telling me what I could and couldn't do and how I could do it. And I'm not going to have a publisher who tells me you're not allowed to sell your own book. I'm not allowed to do what? Yeah. So
I mean, and that's fine. As you say, that can be fine, but as long as an author, you know what you're signing up for.
You know what you're getting into.
The nuances, yeah. I just wanted to ask you about the publisher you've used. Do they are historical novels, is that their area of expertise, or do they publish across the board?
They publish a wide range. I know of a lady who just published a memoir through them. So yeah, there's a wide range. I know someone else who did a children's story through them. So I think that they look for books that they feel have the ability to do well out in the world, and then they give that author the platform to get it out there. So.
And how did you find them? So like in the UK, we have the Writers and Artists Yearbook, which most people will go to. In the States, do you have something similar for writers to go and have a look at and find?
Well, I know there's like the Poets and Writers. It's a magazine that comes out. They have a lot of things in it. You're going to laugh at where I first heard of them. It was on Facebook. Okay, so someone had mentioned something, and so I looked them up. And then, of course, once you look them up, then you get ads all the time because, the internet's a scary place and they know exactly what you're looking for. And I really held off for a long time, even reaching out to them, because I had a fear that they were just a vanity press, that they would publish anybody and just take my money. And, I don't have any need to have someone, if that's what you're going for, I'd rather just do it on my own.
Yeah.
I don't want to pay someone else more to do what I could do on my own. But I started kind of really researching them, finding out if other people had good or bad experiences with them. What did they like? What didn't they like? And I went ahead and turned my, manuscript in, and I heard back from them very quickly. It was really interesting. And they wanted to talk with me on, like, could we talk with you anytime this week? And I set it up a time for, Thursday or whatever. And I assumed we were talking about what they were and what they could do for me. So they're telling me all of this information, and I'm listening, and and they said, do you have any questions? And I said, yeah, I do. I said, given all that you've said, it sounds very interesting. And I'm just wondering, how long after a person turns in a manuscript to you would you accept that manuscript? Like, are we talking it's months or? And they said, oh, we think you must misunderstand. After this conversation, if you're interested, we're sending you a contract.
Oh gosh, very quick.
It was just like, oh my gosh. And I ran up to the office where my husband was. My eyes are wide. I'm still on the phone. I'm doing like this, and I'm going, oh my God. And I'm just, and he's looking at me trying to read my lips, and I'm mouthing to him, they've accepted the book, and you could tell he's looking at me, and and so I go running back downstairs. Well, then he follows me and he can hear me talking. Then it kind of dawns on him what's going on. But I was just completely crazy. I got off the phone. I started to cry. Then I laughed. Then I cried some more. Then I laughed. Then I cried. I mean, it was just
all the
hormonal. Yeah.
All the emotions. Well, congratulations. I mean,
thank you.
What's so exciting for you, and it's just the start, I have no doubt. And so what are you working on now at the moment?
So I have another book that is actually mostly ready. I haven't had it through to the editor yet. So, there's all that horrible editing portion to go through. Although, having gone through this once, I've already gone through and edited based on what I know they told me with the first book. So I'm hoping that the round of edits for this one will be not quite as onerous. It was difficult. It was really hard for me. But I went back this time and I said, okay, so I already know the types of things I was told before. Let's fix those now. So the book is called An Enemy Like Me, and has a World War II backdrop. So it's another historical fiction, but it's not really it's not a shoot 'em up, bang 'em up, lots of information about battles or anything. And it's very loosely based on my grandfather, because he was in World War II and he fought in Germany. But my family is German American, and several generations removed. But he used to talk about the idea that when he was in Germany fighting, he often wondered if anybody on the other side was a cousin. Okay. And so I took that idea and really explored it in depth in this book. So I made the character someone who was first generation American, fighting in World War II, found themselves fighting in Germany, found themselves fighting in the town where his parents had originated from.
Oh, and that my heart's already breaking.
Okay. And that idea, so that's where the title, An Enemy Like Me, comes from. It's this idea that, governments create wars and ordinary people fight them. And the person on the other side of the gun on any other day might be someone you'd invite to dinner. And so it's exploring that whole concept from the point of the view of the soldier, his wife, and his 4-year-old son that he left behind when he went to war. So that's kind of the general.
I feel it's going to be a tearjerker. What a great premise, though. Amazing premise for a story, and that connection, and how we are all so connected.
And I think that it's a really good, it's a good one to follow behind what I've written already, because once again, it explores these feelings that people have that we need to understand. I really think that the book that I've got coming out would help people understand. For instance, I tell people all the time, I do not like the Russian government and what they're doing, but I do not dislike Russians.
Exactly.
There's a distinction there, and words matter. And so when I hear people say, down with Russia, it's like down with the oppressive Russian government, because the people are not the government. And we need to understand that in the war that's happening now. And really that second book that I've written is what explores that whole idea of, we're more alike than we are dissimilar.
Yes. And
if we could
sentiment to end on, really beautiful.
Thank you.
So where can our listeners find out more about you, and particularly more about your books?
Well, they can find out about me on my website. It's www.terimmbrown.com, and that's Teri with one R. You can also get my book on Amazon. And if you go to my website, you can sign up for my newsletter, and you'll get the 10 historical novels that you've never heard of that will bring you to tears. Ooh. So it's it. So what I did was I asked a lot of historic fiction enthusiasts what some of their favorite books were that were not, like on the Oprah's book list or whatever, so that we could get some of those that they've read that really touched them that most people haven't heard of. And so that's what that list is.
Fantastic. Well, I shall link to all of those in the show notes. Teri,
wonderful.
Thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed being here.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found that helpful and inspirational. Now, don't forget to come on over to Facebook and join my group, Turning Readers into Writers. It is especially for you if you are a beginner writer who is looking to write their first novel. If you join the group, you will also find a free cheat sheet there called 3 Secret Hacks to Write with Consistency. So go to emmadesi.com/turning readers into writers, hit join. Can't wait to see you in there. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.